Welcome to the debut episode of My Soul Connection. I'm your host, Billy K. Kavert. Thank you so much for tuning in. Today is incredibly special, not just because it's the launch of this podcast, but because it marks a full circle moment in my own healing journey. Before we dive in, though, I want to set the stage for this conversation and this entire podcast. Every episode you'll hear is connected to my own path in some way, the lessons I've learned, and the continuous evolution that I'm still experiencing. So I'm not here to teach or tell you how to live your life. I'm here to share my imperfect journey in hopes that it will resonate and maybe even awaken something in you. One of my favorite Buddhist proverbs says that the lotus flower blooms most beautifully from the deepest and thickest mud. And as life would have it, that message became very real for me, which is what led me to today's guest, Rosie Acosta. I met Rosie during one of the darkest times in my life, and she helped me see what I couldn't. And she really opened up a spiritual door that I didn't even know was there. My life has transformed in many ways that I could have never imagined, and having Rosie here to help launch this podcast is extra special. And it's also a reminder to me of how far I've come. Rosie is a mindfulness teacher for Headspace. She's a yoga educator, a speaker, and a best-selling author of You Are Radically Loved. With over 20 years of study and over a decade of teaching, Rosie has worked with a diverse range of students from her East LA community to Olympic athletes, NBA All-Stars, and veterans. She also hosts the Radically Well podcast. It's such an honor to have Rosie here with me today. So without further ado, here is Rosie Acosta. Rosie Acosta, welcome to the first episode of My Soul Connection. This is so awesome that you're here. Thank you so much for joining me. I feel very honored and blessed to have an amazing person like Rosie Acosta on my first episode. So thank you.
I'm so excited. I can barely contain myself. I want our souls to be connected.
They are connected. I think they are. And, you know, honestly, part of the reason I'm so excited is not just because it's you, but it's also because this is such a full circle moment for us. Like, we met back in 2016 when my life was in shambles. I was a little bit of a mess. I was pretty unstable, and you really helped pick me up off the ground, help me reconnect to myself and get my life back together. And it's just come full circle where I'm on this path now of reinventing myself and creating a life that I'm truly excited about. And this is one part of it. So I'm happy to get to share this with people, and I'm happy that you're here to share it with me. So thank you.
Goodness. I can't, you said 2016 and I'm like, it's 2025. It's going to be 10 years.
I know. Yeah. That we've known each other that long. It's crazy.
I honestly, Kay, did not realize it was that long.
Yeah. I remember the dates. So, because that was a rough time in life. I'm like, 2016 was like basically a big bombshell explosion in my life. So I remember, but yeah, it's been a long time, and I feel like a completely different person than what I was back then. But
you are. I mean, you really are a completely different person. You're definitely not the person that I talked to back in 2016. And to me, it's just a test to your resilience and your ability to, be open. I mean, that's the one thing that I really, really admire about you. And it's inspiring because there was never, as low of a moment you've said you were in, or like that experience, you were still very much open. And I think that that's the key to being able to overcome any difficult time in your life.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's also worth pointing out that it's not that I'm actually a completely different person now than I was back then. It's really more of just that I actually found myself. So this person's always been inside of me, but it was masked by all kinds of other things. And we're going to get into that stuff during the episode. So we're going to dive all into my journey, which is a very vulnerable share, to be honest with you. But I want to share it because the whole purpose of My Soul Connection is sharing my journey so that people can, reconnect to themselves and find ways to find their own life's purpose. So that's what this is all about. So on that note, I'd like the audience to know a little bit about you as well. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us about your upbringing, how you got into yoga and meditation, like your journey to become a writer, and just kind of anything else you want the audience to know.
Lord, how long are we going to have
where to start,
here?
Right?
It's so funny. I try to find different ways of sharing now, just because I've shared it, so many times. And I remember for a really long time, when I started teaching yoga and meditation over 15 years ago, I remember feeling like me sharing my story is gonna it's gonna hinder the message. It's gonna stop people from resonating with me and from connecting with me. And I really believed that for a long time. I felt like nobody needs to know where I came from, how I grew up, my journey here. They just need to know that the information that I'm teaching, that I've integrated it, and that I am really passionate about it. But, you know, for most people want to know why that is or how that is or why they connect with certain people when they do. And I found that when I started sharing my background, I actually started to connect with people on a deeper level. And so I grew up in East Los Angeles in the early 90s in a really chaotic environment. There was a lot of gang violence at that time. Both my parents are immigrants. And so we lived in a mostly Hispanic neighborhood. And it was, most parents worked, and I always like to refer to my childhood as like Lord of the Flies. It was just like a bunch of little kids who had elder aunts or little grandmothers, like little abuelitas taking care of them, which in many Hispanic cultures isn't really like teaching you values and teaching you any sort of skills. They're just like nurturing you and taking care of you, and that was my experience, right? So growing up in that environment, by the time I was a teenager, I was experiencing severe panic attacks, like really severe. And a lot of it had to do with growing up, experiencing and seeing violence and being in a constant state of fight or flight. And that really threw me into this like spin of chaos. I didn't know how to deal with it. And so I started to have these really bad panic attacks. I had agoraphobia. I wouldn't be able to, I'd get to a place and I wouldn't want to leave because I was scared that something bad would happen. And obviously, it comes from a valid place. I was seeing people get shot and, have really violent things happen to them. So it made sense. But it was during this time that my mom's friend was really into meditation and yoga and happened to give my mom this it's book by Paramahansa Yogananda, who wrote Autobiography of a Yogi. It's a pretty big staple in the world of yoga. He's one of the, yogic masters that brought yoga to the West in the 30s and started and founded the Self-Realization Fellowship. And so I was, raised in a Catholic household. So anything that had to do not with Catholicism, I really was into, like any new agey thing. Give me the horoscopes, give me, the woo-woo, like really cool witchy things I was really into. And so I felt like this was one of those things. And I ended up having a really intense experience at one of the Self-Realization Fellowship temples, the one in Hollywood, which I wrote about in my book. This was part of
I
my
remember.
process. Yes. So it was the first time I felt safe in my body. I actually felt my body at 15, 16 years old. I'd never felt safe in my space. And so that really, and that really woke something up within me where it was the sort of pivotal point that I needed to feel like I was okay. And so that was it. That's what spawned my desire to create a life out of teaching these things to people like me. It's like learning these tools or teaching these tools to people that didn't have any.
So were you practicing for a while first? And if so, for how long before you actually went into teaching?
Yeah. I practiced for about 4 or 5 years. I did my first teacher training when I was 19 or 20. it was this really cute little studio. And the it was a couple that they were like Osho followers, and really into yoga and meditation, and like the teacher training was a weekend. So like now
Yeah.
looking back, it's like I've
Yeah.
done like over 1,000 hours of training, and I've have my
Wow.
own yoga school, and I'm in a different place looking back, but it's just funny to think like, oh, become a certified yoga teacher in a weekend.
Yeah.
And we didn't even do any curriculum. It was really just taught, and it was just me. I was the only one. I was the
Oh
only
my
one.
gosh.
So
You
it's
were the
really
only student?
awkward. I was the
Oh,
only
wow.
student, so it wasn't like I could kind of leave. I remember feeling like I really wanted to leave when I first got there
Oh my
because
gosh.
it was this little room. It was this just
Maybe that was
tiny
the practice
studio.
though, because yoga of
Yeah,
not leaving, right? Of staying
right.
and yeah.
Yeah. So then after that, I did a couple other certifications in that time, but I was working full time. And so it wasn't until probably my late, like 26, 27, that I started to like teach full time.
Right.
Yeah.
And
That's been a
I
long
hear you
time.
talking about yoga and meditation almost as if they're one and the same. I'm kind of curious about that because I found that people often misunderstand yoga just as much as they misunderstand meditation if they're not into the practice.
Right.
Like yoga is not just a physical practice. It's obviously a lot about breath work and a lot about
Yeah.
like kind of tapping into your intuition and feeling things in your body. And like I mentioned, I've had this experience a lot in yoga where I've just had to stay in an uncomfortable position, maybe for a long period of time. And that's part of how you relate to life sometimes, like how you have to be in uncomfortable situations and how you can use those practices out in your daily life. And meditation too, I find it's often misunderstood. I talk to people out there who are like, who either love meditation or hate it, or maybe they don't hate it, but they don't get it. They're like, it's not my thing. And I hear them say things like, I don't have time in my day because they think you have to dedicate an hour to meditation or that it's going to take years for it to become something that's useful for them or that you have to set up a freaking shrine in your house to like meditate and sit cross-legged and be this ultra spiritual person. Those are a lot of common misconceptions. So I'm curious, how would you define and simplify the act of meditation and kind of dispel some of those common myths?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's sort of a paradox in the simplifying meditation because it's simple, yet it's also really hard, right?
Right.
So,
Yes.
so yoga, the definition of yoga means union. So the idea is the unification of mind, body, and spirit. And
Mhm.
so yoga, as in yogic philosophy, is different. Most people think of yoga as these physical forms, that these asanas, right, that we do, these postures. And that actually came way, way later. In fact, one of the sort of cornerstone texts that we read for any yoga training or any sort of immersion in yoga is the Yoga Sutras. And
Mhm.
in the Yoga Sutras, which is basically a philosophical how-to book, like how to be a yogi,
Mhm.
it only mentions the physical posture 3 times in the entire book. And the physical
Wow.
posture is seated cross-legged. It's like
Mhm.
you're seated, that's your asana, that's your posture. And in fact, I think it's the most difficult posture to do. It's
For
the most
sure.
difficult, thing to approach. And in many ways, I felt that teaching yoga was so much easier than teaching people, guiding people through a meditation practice.
Mhm.
So I feel like they're absolutely related to each other. Obviously, the idea of movement was more for us to be able to sit for a longer period of time, not
Mhm.
necessarily for the spiritual aspect. And yes, we can have a spiritual experience when in movement, and that could be
Mhm.
running, that could be walking, it could be yoga, it could be weightlifting. the idea is how, going back to what you were saying, how sometimes when you're in difficult poses, it's like staying in the pose longer is this representation, and it's a guide. It's a guidepost to how we do anything on the mat is how we do everything in life.
Right.
And so I think that looking at it from that framework, the connection is symbiotic, yoga and meditation. For me, I felt like the yoga physical aspect of it was a lot easier. It was so much easier to do than the actual, internal practice of getting to know yourself.
Right. Absolutely. 100% agree with that. Yeah. And it brings up another question for me too, in terms of, I also recognize that meditation's not for everybody. And I'm curious what alternative practices you could recommend for people who want to find stillness and connect to their intuition, but don't necessarily want to practice meditation.
How to find stillness when all you want to do is move.
Yeah, that is kind of a silly question now that I think about it.
No, it's not. No, but it's good. No, but because we all want that, right? And I, at this point, studying for over 20 years and teaching for as long as I have, I feel like I have a different approach to how I explain these kinds of, practices, and how I'm more about encouraging people to find what works for them. It's like with nutrition, right? So I'm a certified nutritionist, and I kind of went down that path for a little bit. And I did my training with IIN, and it's an Institute of Integrative Nutrition. And one of the things that they talk about a lot is this idea of bioindividuality, like one person's food is another person's poison.
Yes.
And I really liked that approach to practice, to physical practice, even because you might like weightlifting, and that might be your ultimate get in the zone. And for me, I might like doing, restorative hatha yoga or yin, right? And for me, that's like, it takes me to that place. But you and I could be having the same type of experience doing two completely opposite things.
Right.
And so when we're talking about meditation and our approach to meditation and how people view meditation, I think you have to sort of dissect what works for you and what doesn't work for you. And look, ultimately, this idea of, for me, if you come to me and you say, I can't meditate, so like, what's something else I can do? Well, I would say, if you can breathe, you can meditate.
Right.
Number one. And number two, I would say, well, why don't we incorporate a mindfulness practice, which is different than meditation, right? A mindfulness practice is our ability to be present. And why don't we incorporate a mindfulness practice into your daily life? What you're doing? What do you like to do? What is it that is it packing lunches for your kids? Is it making dinner for your family? Is it, creative writing? Is it running? Like, do you love to
playing
run?
An instrument?
Yeah, exactly. What is it in your life that we can then begin to create a framework around that so that you can feel like you can be still,
Right.
The thing about stillness, Kay, is like emotion can't hit a moving target. So I think
that's good.
I think, right. And I think a lot of the time people are afraid to be still. It's scary.
And on that note, let's go back to 2016 for a moment.
Okay.
I just kind of want to set the stage for where I was at, because I was not a meditator. So all this stuff we're talking about with yoga and meditation is post train wreck of my life when I started to figure out I need to do something different. But let's go back to 2016. So when we first met, I was separated from my husband of 12 years at the time, and my boys were only 5 and 6 years old. So they were young, and I was completely lost. I hate to say this, but I'll admit it. I was blaming my husband for everything. And I was just at this really rock bottom moment. And I'm curious, like, when we first we had talked on the phone about I was going to potentially coach with you. And I told you my whole story, what had led up to that moment. And I would be willing to bet that you saw right through my story and thought, yeah, this really isn't about your marriage, or this really isn't about that it's all his fault. It's probably more about how I had gotten away from myself. I'm assuming that you kind of saw that from a mile away. So I'm curious, as a mindfulness coach, and how do you even begin with someone who has unknowingly been living like a false story or a false narrative for so long? Where do you even start with that?
Well, I think that you have to just meet people where they are.
Mm-hmm.
And I think me seeing past anything or having my own sort of, diagnoses or thoughts is irrelevant to where you were, right? You were at a place where you wanted peace. You wanted
Mm-hmm.
some respite because you had been on this track for a long time. It wasn't just
it was
like
several years leading up to that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think at that point, as a coach, you have to be able to meet people where they are, and you have to sort of see how much they're willing to see,
Mm-hmm.
really. So it's either that's how I work anyway. And now that I'm sort of training in more of like the clinical field, there's a lot of correlations to how even I was trained, not just as a teacher, but as a coach, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there are so many correlations, but the thing that they all have in common is the ability to empower your student or your client in a way that empowers them to make a change.
Right.
And so if I came in and was like, listen, Kay, like this has nothing to do with anybody but you,
Mm-hmm.
you have to stop and think. If you knew then what you know now, knowing you'd probably be like, all right, let's do it. Like, let's go in the trenches, But I just feel like, I don't know. What do you think? Do you
I see what you're saying. It's like most people would stop in their tracks because that's a lot to face all at once, when you have to be sort of slowly led into the path, right? The path of awareness, really. And I think for me, I remember when we did decide to start coaching together, that you really helped me kind of trace back to my childhood. And I had never been through really any formal therapy at that point. I mean, my husband and I went through 4 or 5 different traditional therapists that did not work. And they were very textbook. It was very impersonal. It was just...
How did you know, though? Can you tell? I mean, I don't want to deviate from your question, but how did you know? Can you tell? Because I think this will be really helpful for people, because I love the fact that you went through those different people, because so many people, Kay, they'll be like, oh, we've never gone to therapy. We've been married for 10 years. Let's go. And they find somebody that maybe is not aligned, and nobody says anything. And then they stay with this like person that they don't resonate with. So can you tell us how that happened?
Yeah, it's hard. I think the options for people out there it's difficult because, first of all, there's financial considerations to take. And sometimes you're just going toward whatever's covered through insurance, which is the route we went initially. And we were given a list of, 20 providers, and half of them were out of business already, or had moved on, or weren't even in the area anymore, or weren't an EAP provider or whatever. There was there was a lot of stuff I had to get through to even find the people that we did end up going to. And then we started going to one guy, and he was nice. He was a nice guy, but we just couldn't relate to anything that he was saying.
But what did that feel like? Did you know in your body, were you like everything in your body was saying no? Like, did you guys talk to each other? Like how did you know?
Well, I think so the first guy that we went to was actually prior to what I will call our implosion. And there were some helpful things that he was saying, and having us do some little practical exercises and things like that. And we felt like we were kind of like mildly chipping away, but we were sitting on a ticking time bomb. And so, like, for me, I was sitting there in my heart going, we got to fast track this shit. This is not working. Like, I can't, and he was like, 40 minutes, 30 minutes away from us during the day. We had to peel off for work and take the time to go over there. And I just felt like this is not, I mean, I know you can't like rush through this stuff, but I just felt like it wasn't happening fast enough. So when we moved to another therapist, and it was this lady who just, everything looked, she did therapy in her home and everything looked kind of like picture perfect in her house, but she just, everything was very textbook. Like she would, do the whole, like, let's sit and face each other and practically read these scripts. And it just felt like very inauthentic and very awkward. And I think, I mean, the whole time I was sitting there going, oh my God, this is painful. And then I'd get home and say to Sean, so what do you think about that? And he's like, this is not like, I mean, we gave it a chance. We went to each therapist probably, well, in the beginning, probably like 10 to 12 times. And then as we were going through therapists, we'd get through like 2 or 3 sessions and be like, no, this is not cutting it. We were getting to the point where we're like, we need to find somebody that helps us, that will help us. So the funny thing is when I was introduced to you through sort of a mutual connection that we have, I recognized that I was going to have to pay out of pocket. And I was like, I don't care. This is too important to worry about insurance and all that stuff. But I knew that you had more of like a spiritual edge to yourself. And just the very first moment we talked, I could tell that there was just something very different about the way that you approached everything. And I think it's what you just said about meeting people where they are. I didn't feel like you had already sort of diagnosed our problem or figured out what track you were going to put us on. You just had this very authentic way of seeing where we were and then gently getting us on a path that started to show us, I think, individually where we had gotten away from ourselves, where there was a lot of patterns and conditioning from perhaps even as far back as our childhood that were creating these situations that were just, getting us into this loop that we couldn't get out of. And it only took a couple of sessions before we realized, before there was this awareness that came about that like, wow, this is stuff we've never looked at before. And I think we did some stuff together as a couple for a while, but we kind of split off because we realized we had our own individual shit to work on. And I also felt like a real sense of trust with you because you were really vulnerable in the sense that you shared stuff with us about your own personal situation and how you use the tools and throughout your life, but to get yourself out of challenging situations too. So I felt like you were the one person if we're like, I'm not trying to compare therapists here, but you were the one person who really walked the walk. You didn't just talk the talk. I felt like all the other ones were reading out of a textbook. It just felt so inauthentic. And that was not the case with you. And so, yeah, it just lit up this awareness in me that there's a lot more I need to look at. And I think by going back to my childhood and really digging into a lot of that conditioning and subconscious, just the kind of patterns that I was in and the constant need for validation and feeling of worthiness and how I was projecting these patterns of beliefs onto other people in my life, it was just really impactful for me. And I mean, gosh, we got through a lot of layers of stuff that I did not know was sitting there. And, that brings me to a question too. Do you believe that reconnecting with our childhood experiences is essential for discovering like who we really are and our life's purpose for those people who are really stuck,
Yeah, I honestly, if you asked me 10 years ago, I would have said yes. But now I don't know that it's for everyone. I don't think, because look, I mean, if we're looking at, more of a more modernistic view on, different types of like cognitive behavioral therapy or, dialectal behavioral therapy, like these different types of modalities that focus more on the present moment and forward movement. I feel like I don't know that everybody will benefit from, going into trauma, going into trauma. Some people do. I think it's useful for people that have not processed and that have been emotionally constipated for most of their life. I think that there's absolutely some value to that. I know for me there was, and so it was really valuable for me to do that kind of work. And I feel like after all these years and just having different experiences with people, students, clients, I can see the benefit for some. and it
Right.
really is a practice of discernment as a guide and as a teacher to see when it's useful and when it's not. But I think that for people, it's easy for people to gauge whether or not they will benefit from it if they just do some inquiry,
Right.
like for us, there was a lot of, and it's not necessarily, it's like, oh, we're going into like child healing type of thing, which I know people do, and I think it's really beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And I do, and I've done a lot of the practices and I've done a lot of the work because I feel like I need to be able to integrate it if I want to speak to it. But I also feel like a lot of it, the only reason why I like to go into it is because there are some core beliefs that we form at that age that prevent us from achieving a goal or progressing in our own emotional, spiritual, even physical well-being. Because if there's an action and we have a conditioned belief, then the result or the consequences is always going to be the same. We're going to go into these same patterns. We're going to have the same experiences with romantic relationships or friendships or boundaries with our parents. It's really kind of a simplistic way of looking at it. And I'm not trying to simplify psychology. I just
Sure.
really feel like there is a way for us to utilize certain theories and also approach it from an intuitive and spiritually wholeheartedly connected place.
Right. No, that makes complete sense. And I think everything that you just said really resonated with me too. It did. All of the stuff we talked about going back into the childhood really worked for me because I had never taken a look at that before. And I'm also somebody I recognize I don't have any capital T trauma. I don't have any huge traumas from my past. So that can look very different for somebody who's experienced something super significant compared to me. But I do think in my case, it was really helpful. I remember just uncovering things that were like, oh my God, how did I not see that I was, that this is where this behavior or whatever was, where this was born from. I mean, I could give endless examples, but we don't have time for it all.
Yeah, but Kay, this is it's so key. And I think it's so valuable for people to hear that because if you're not, look, this is my world. I grew up, I mean, essentially I've been doing it since I was a teenager, right? So this world is like, I'm really sort of, I have a lot of experience and knowledge, and I'm very well versed in the vernacular, and I understand a lot of these processes. But most people, like my in-laws or some of my relatives, they don't have this connection to these kinds of practices, or they have, they don't understand what you tell them, a spiritual connection, and they're like, oh yeah, like I go to church on Sundays for an hour.
Right. Yes.
And that to me, for some people that's enough. And I'm not saying that it's not.
Sure.
I just really feel like most people generally aren't on a path to doing hard work, because it is hard work. It is really hard work.
Yeah,
but
it's challenging and triggering. And
yeah. And most people will find that there's a point in their life where they feel completely empty, or like something's wrong, or their relationships start to fall apart, or they start to feel like there's no joy in what they do, and they're feeling stuck in their life and they're struggling. And most of us numb it away. We watch TV, we are addicted to pornography, we're addicted to substances. We want something outside to restore us back to health. And that is most of us, generally speaking,
And actually it's a great point, and points to the reason why I wanted to do this podcast in the first place, because, like we can look at our parents' generation and say they just didn't have the exposure to it that we have. I mean, with the internet and all of the resources we have now, it's so much easier to be living in that environment, right? But even the people nowadays who are living in that environment, who either push it away because they think it's too woo, to be spiritual, or they just are like, nah, I don't need that stuff. I'll figure it out on my own. And then they go, drink a bottle of Jack that night to cover up how they're feeling, right? It's like, so there's partly a problem with people who've just never been exposed to it, and then partly people who I think are just pushing it away. And part of the reason I want to do this podcast is because I grew up in a very kind of like practical environment. And by the way, I'll just preface this by saying I had a great childhood. I love my parents. They're probably going to listen to this someday. But we were just very black and white thinking, like you grow up, you go to school, you do well in school, you go to college, you get a good job, you get married, you have kids, yada, yada. And that's all well and good, but there was never really much encouragement for me to look at myself from within and to kind of be open to all of these other parts of my life. And I think there's a lot of people who feel that way. And I also have been in the corporate world for the last 25 years where it's all about productivity and hustling, and people get really disconnected from themselves when they're just slaving away all the time and they just don't make time for it. Or again, maybe they just don't know what they don't know. And so I'm kind of hoping to bridge that gap here between people that have just missed it all their lives for whatever reason, some of the ones that we just mentioned, or because they're just kind of closed off to it, and let them know that there are actually tools that you can use that don't require you being some, big spiritual guru to tap into that stuff. So it kind of brings me to a question about you too. I wondered, I was talking about your willingness to kind of share some personal things about yourself when we were coaching together and how you use certain tools. Would you be willing to share it doesn't have to be any one in specific, but kind of an idea of any challenges you faced in life where you've really kind of gotten disconnected from yourself and didn't even maybe realize it at first, and how you brought yourself back to the practices and used your tools that you teach to get reconnected with yourself?
I mean, there's two examples that come to mind. I think I'll use the most recent because I have, I went into early menopause. I've talked about it publicly. Mm-hmm. And it started, I went into perimenopause when I was 35, and I'm 41 now, and I'm postmenopausal. I went into full menopause at 40. So I think, and this was happening during 2020. So the world kind of shut down, and it was a really intense time for many, many people, not just me. Obviously, all of us had this very intense experience that we've never experienced in our lifetime before. And even our parents have never experienced anything like it. So it was obviously a very trying time. But for me, that time was, I say two different things, because as I was going through this really rough transition, there was also a chemical imbalance with my hormones. So in a way, that was really the catalyst for me. I didn't know if it was just like, maybe my relationship is over now and I'm just really unhappy, or maybe my career is just not giving me what it used to. Maybe my purpose has changed. Maybe I have no purpose. Maybe I don't know why I'm alive. Like, maybe what is the purpose of being here,
Right.
So it was really, I would say, probably one of the darkest times in my life, because I've been in low places, but I'd never experienced being that low. And it didn't matter, where I went, who I meditated to, what Catholic church in Rome I went to, what, medicine man I went to, because I did all of that. I did all of the things. And ultimately, I'm like, well, I was going to make a joke, but I'm like, and ultimately just getting on hormone replacement therapy fixed it all. But I mean, no, but yes, it did.
But you still had to use all the tools throughout that
but I still
journey,
had
right?
to,
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
And I think really, I mean, if you want to look at it from a spiritual perspective, and it is because we're here and it's you, and this is part of our connecting to our soul. I finally came to this moment where I felt like, if I can't figure this out, I don't have anything else to give. Like, I'm kind of at that place, and once certain people started coming to my life, and the conversation about hormone, just to give people some context, I'm like, I don't even take Advil. I was very against taking anything outside of my internal pharmacy. And I was so grateful that the people that came into my life, I respected enough and valued their opinion. And I was like, okay, I'm going to try this. And it really, saved my life. I mean, it really did. And so looking back at it now, thinking about those moments where I'd sit on my cushion, and sometimes like I'd just be sobbing, like I just don't know, like I don't know what is happening, and I'd be like, asking for guidance and for help and guidance and for help. And then you look back and you're like, okay, well, you got it, like there's that, right?
But it was a journey and it wasn't an easy one.
Yeah, for sure. Not an easy one.
Yeah.
There's that story right now, and I'm going to butcher it. There's a big hurricane, and this man ends up on the roof of his home, and there's water everywhere, and he's on the roof, and he's asking God for help, and a man in a rowboat comes by and is like, hey, like, do you want to hop in? He's like, no, like God's going to help me. Like I'm asking God for help. And then he goes away. And then a little while later, another rowboat comes, this time with more people. And the guy rowing the boat says, hey, like we have room for one more. Do you want to get in here? He's like, no, God's going to come save me. And then the third is like, a helicopter comes and is like, hey, we're here to rescue you. And he's like, no, God's going to come rescue me. And the guy dies. Right. And then he goes to heaven and then asks God, hey, like I asked for you, like, why did you not come to rescue me? And God says, I tried. I sent 2 boats and a helicopter and you didn't take my help.
Yep.
And so to me, I love that story. And again,
such a great story.
You've heard it before.
I've heard some iteration of it. Yeah.
And I may have simplified it just to kind of make the point.
No, it was perfect.
But that's kind of where I felt in that moment, when I look back, I'm like, okay, I mean, I asked for help and here it is, like, maybe this is the way. And I think that's that part where I feel now looking back, you always figure this out in hindsight, right? Like we're having this conversation about what happened to you almost 10 years ago. And now you can totally dissect it and be like, this happened and it was this, and then it was this and it was this.
Yeah. And it actually reminds me of when we first met and I was telling you this whole story and how things came to be with Sean and I, and you were like, okay, this happened for a reason though. Like there was a lot of stuff that you guys had been sweeping under the rug for a long time and feelings that you weren't acknowledging and different things that you weren't giving attention to. And so, yes, this feels like a huge traumatic blow up, but this is meant to help you to start over and figure this out because we got lost in not paying attention to the details along the way and how we were feeling. And so that, to me, looking back, it was like one of the worst times of my life, but it was also the one thing that saved me from having a miserable life. Like it felt very traumatic at the time, but it was what I needed to have a big wake up call, And so I think it can come in that form as well.
Yeah.
I remember you pointing out to me one time early on that I am such a doer. I tend to be this person that leaps into action, sometimes without even thinking first, certainly without feeling first. And I think that was a bit of a coping mechanism of mine. And it served me in a lot of ways, right? It helped me in my business career and financial success and things like that. But it also really got in my way. And for other, A types out there, those of us who have been conditioned to believe that to value productivity over all else, how do we learn the art of pausing and tuning in? How can we tell if an action we're about to take is in true alignment with who we truly are?
Wow. Yeah, that's a great question. And I always like to let people know that I am part of the A Club crew because, so, they always say you teach what you need to learn. Yeah. And so I find that, acknowledging it is the first step of admitting you have a problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Of admitting you have a problem. I really love what you just said. How do I know that what I'm doing is in alignment with what I want, essentially,
Yeah.
right? I think that that's a really it's a really great question to ask. We value productivity almost more than we value our own fulfillment.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's really it's a matter of prioritizing you and what brings you joy and what brings you happiness and what really fills your cup. Now, some might say being productive really fills my cup, and there's nothing wrong with that, but what is the cost? Like, what is the
Right.
cost benefit of your productivity? Is it, deteriorating relationships? Is it deteriorating your health? Is it deteriorating your joy? You have to really take a true assessment about what you value in your life and what's important. I think that for many people, we look at our soul connection, or we look at, doing things for just cause as a luxury. And in a way, yeah, I could see that perspective, but I also feel like it's so vital to being human.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is part of our humanity. We're human beings, not human doings. And I think that
Yeah.
that's the part that most people disengage with, especially people that are really into productivity, because output is going to merit my value in society.
Yeah. I was just thinking that. I was thinking of how my output used to be a measure of my success in a way, and a measure of validation that I got from other people, whether it was corporate America or my parents or whomever. And it's funny thinking about corporate America and just American culture in general. I think we've gotten we're big on our to-do lists, and we've gotten to the point of forgetting what a priority actually is, because I think we put so much on our priority list that it becomes just completely overwhelming. And we have to be able to step back and figure out what truly matters. And that can go from an hour to hour basis, in the present moment when you're working throughout your day, versus just how you prioritize your entire life.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's important. And it also kind of leads to, or I think it coincides with, expectations we have of ourselves. I remember, this is an embarrassing thing to admit, but I'm putting it all out there here. I remember you asked me one time what my biggest disappointment about my husband was. And I said something like, when he doesn't meet my expectations. And you told me expectations are just premeditated resentments. And I was like, oh God, ooh, that's so true. Oh my gosh, that's so true. And that has been tattooed in my brain ever since. And it really helped me realize the high expectations I had on myself, and the harsh expectations I had on myself, and how I projected that onto a lot of people around me, my kids, my husband, my family. And it created this like constant cycle of resentment in my life. So what can people learn, as they step back and examine their own expectations that they place on others?
Yeah, I would highly suggest that they do a little self-inventory of what the expectations are for themselves. Like, what
Right.
are you putting on your own expectation list, and how are you projecting that onto everybody else? Because as you're saying that, I remember exactly that, us having that conversation, and it's been a while. And as you're
Mm-hmm.
saying, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that conversation specifically, and I kind of need to hear it myself today, because boy,
Got a lot on your plate.
got a lot on my plate right now. My partner's really testing my mindfulness
Your skills.
abilities.
Yep.
Yeah. Just like, but I feel like ultimately it's a matter of accepting what people's values are. And I'll
Mhm.
I'll explain, because the way that we see certain things is viewed through the prism of our own understanding.
Mhm.
I view the world a certain way, you view the world a certain way.
So I want to talk about just kind of breaking patterns and rewiring our brains. There's a guy I follow. You probably know the name, Peter Crone. For those who don't know him, he's been dubbed the mind architect out there in the health and wellness space. And I love all of his quotes, but one that stuck with me in particular was, life presents you with people and circumstances to reveal where you're not free. And I have loved that quote. It's really stuck with me, and it's just been a constant source of reflection for me. So whenever I notice history repeating itself in sort of a negative way, like I can feel myself stuck in a loop on something, I'll now look inward and I'll just ask myself, what's the universe trying to tell me right now about this issue that keeps repeating itself? And how is it holding me back from the freedom that I want, right? Mm-hmm. And it kind of reminds me of a coaching session. You'll probably remember this one too, from a while back. It was during COVID, I think. And I had a falling out with one of my best friends of over 30 years. And we hadn't talked in months. It was really getting to me. I was trying to pretend like it wasn't, but it was. And I came and talked to you about it during our session. And you asked me the question, has this ever happened in your relationship with her before? And I'm like, yeah, well, kind of on a smaller scale, nothing like this. This was definitely the biggest blowout we've had. But we've had numerous issues over the years that are a reflection of this. And you said, well, I think she's your guru. I think she was put on this earth to teach you something about yourself, and you're not learning the lessons, and therefore history keeps repeating itself. And the lessons are getting more and more intense each time. The consequences are more grave. And I'm like, oh my gosh, maybe she's right. But this is weird. I couldn't wrap my mind around that. And then you had suggested that I write her a letter, and I didn't have to send it to her, about all the things that she had taught me or that I had learned from her in the last 30 plus years. And I specifically remember being on the phone with you. We weren't like on a Zoom or something. And I think I probably gave you the biggest eye roll I've ever given anyone, because I'm like, is she fucking kidding me? She wants me to write her a letter. I am right in this situation. I am not wrong. I'm right. I don't need to write her a letter. She needs to write me a letter. No, but being the good student that I am, I did my homework, got behind my computer begrudgingly, started a letter, didn't send it, and all kinds of stuff poured out of me. I mean, I think in all the time that I worked with you, that was probably the most profound thing that got me out of the state of mind that I was in and made me recognize kind of all the ways that I had been a jerk all my life, especially to her. And so I reached out to her and I said, hey, can we talk? She agreed. And I told her about the letter. She didn't even want to read it, but I basically owned up to all of my stuff. I explained all the ways that I had noticed that I judged her over the years, how I'd, let my ego take over, how I'd projected onto her, et cetera. And I just owned up to it all. And she actually did the same. She owned up to her stuff. And we buried the hatchet. We had this great conversation. And we've literally never had anything even close to like that happen again. And that was like 4 or 5 years ago. So it was a huge moment for me. And it was just something that really helped me break a pattern that I had been in for 30 plus years. So question for you is, there's always this idea of writing the letter. That's one way. But for when someone becomes aware of a really destructive pattern in life, but maybe they don't have a coach or a therapist or something, where should they begin to break the cycle? Like, what steps would you actually recommend once they become aware of it to break that cycle and break that pattern?
Oh my God, Kay. I mean,
it's a big question because there's a lot.
It's hard to give a generalized tool for people because everybody's so different. Like, I wouldn't give that homework to one of my other clients. You know what I mean? Like, I would never.
That was very specifically prescribed
it was very specific.
To me.
Yeah, because again, you have to meet people where they are. And so if somebody's listening to this right now and they're feeling like this situation continues to repeat itself, I would go back to this framework of, what is it about the situation that upsets you the most? And what is your belief about yourself in this situation? An example, I'm always the victim, people always take advantage of me, or I'm exhausted, or I'm this person doesn't respect me, this person doesn't value me. And if you start to really break it down from the perspective of belief, like, what is the belief about this consistent situation, I have low self-worth. I don't think I'm enough. I don't value myself. You start to really see the when people talk about patterns, like that's the pattern, right? What is it about this particular, it's like I have a very close friend that continuously likes to get into toxic relationships.
Yeah.
There's the very textbook type love bombing that happens. He, is like a serial dater, and it's always within the 6-month period. After the honeymoon period wears off, then there's fights, and then there's, the standard stay with them for a year. And then a year and a half later, they break up. And this has been consistent, for, I'm not going to say how many years I've known this person, because then he'll know who I'm talking about. But this is, and we've discussed this, and we've done this kind of inquiry before. And really, ultimately, it comes down to having low self-worth,
that's true.
Being in this place of like, well, I don't believe I deserve better.
Right.
And so, okay, if that's your belief, then you're going to continue to date people that do this to you and that put you in this situation, because that's what you're attracted to. It's the familiar. It's almost this unconscious magnet that creates scenarios where, if you want to get into like the law of attraction, it's what's bringing these people into the field.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're putting that frequency out there, and people are going to, if I'm a taker and you're a giver, guess what?
Yeah.
Who am I looking for?
Right.
Am I going to be looking for a taker like me?
Right.
No, I'm going to find the person who's going to give me what I need.
And it's funny you mentioned low self-worth, because I think that manifests itself in so many different ways. Even the stuff the story I just told about my friend, that had to do with a lot of low self-worth too, because that's why I was judging and projecting so much, to sort of deflect what I was feeling inside and to make myself rise up a little bit. So yeah, that's good, but good advice. I mean, something that people can at least start to think about,
Yeah.
Well, this has been a great first conversation. There's so much more. I mean, I could have talked to you for another hour, but I so appreciate your time thus far and all just you sharing your wisdom, opening your heart to us today. So thank you again. And just give us a little recap now of what you're working on now, where people can find you. What do you want people to know about what you're working on now?
Oh, goodness. Everybody can go to radicallyloved.com. I am really into teaching mindfulness specific to women or couples going through perimenopause and menopause. I'm working on the second season of my new podcast, the Radically Well podcast. Yeah, we're working on some cool projects, some fun content coming out. I'm, on the Headspace app. So if people want to meditate or practice with me, they can find me on Headspace. And yeah, I think that's it.
She's got the voice of an angel for meditation. I've always told you that. I remember telling you years ago, you really need to record yourself and record some meditations. And you were like, I'm kind of thinking about it. And now you're on Headspace. So
I know I was so resistant. I still am, if I'm honest. I like the in-person, Kay. I want to be with people.
I know. Well, you are now. You get to mix it
yes,
up. And the Radically Well podcast is awesome too. I've listened to it. And believe me, I'm taking notes because I'm right there with you, or I'm a little behind where you were, but I'm older than you, so it's coming.
I know I've had so many women, they're just like, I'm right. I'm older than you are, but how did you already go through all this? I'm like, I don't know. It's like,
I know. I'm kind of jealous that you're like, it's on the otother side. You're on the other side of it now, because I'm just getting into it. And
I'm so excited to like turn 50 and like just be in my 50s and not, I'm like, I'm
just be done.
I've done it. It's done.
I hear you. Well, thank you again for being here. I really appreciate it. And we'll keep tabs on you and find out what Rosie Acosta has next. So
thanks, Kay. I'm so excited for this show. Thank you for letting me be your first guest. And I'm so excited to hear what people thought about this episode and to just see you grow.
Oh, thank you. I hope you enjoyed today's episode and that it inspired you to want to reconnect to yourself in some way beyond the noise of productivity, expectations, and the roles we've been conditioned to play. Rosie reminded us that meditation and mindfulness can look very different for everyone, that it can come through movement, creativity, a task we enjoy, or simply being present in our everyday lives. We also unpacked the powerful idea that how you do anything is how you do everything. Whether it's holding an uncomfortable yoga pose or sitting with emotional discomfort, these practices mirror how we show up in life. One of the biggest takeaways for me, and hopefully for you as well, is the reminder that awareness is the starting point. Whether we're breaking toxic patterns, confronting our childhood conditioning, or letting go of the belief that our worth is measured by our output, the work starts with noticing. And from there, we can begin to shift. Rosie's vulnerable story about her own journey through early menopause and the deep disconnection that came with it is a powerful reminder that even those who teach the tools still need the tools. And the story I shared about healing a long-standing friendship taught me that sometimes the most transformational work begins with owning our part and seeing our triggers as the greatest teachers. So if you're someone who's ever thought, I don't have time for stillness, or this isn't for me, maybe you can explore it in a different way that actually fits your life. Thank you so much for being here today. If this episode resonated with you in any way, please share it with others. It would also mean so much to me to help get this podcast off the ground if you would follow it and then rate and review it as well. Thank you so much.